Welcome to the Antiquities of the Jews by the historian Flavius Josephus. In this presentation, we continue our journey through Book 1, covering chapters 8 through 18. These chapters explore the early families that descended from Noah, the spreading of nations across the earth, and the rise of the great patriarch Abraham, the friend of God. Josephus carefully records the histories, lineages, and events that shape the foundation of both scripture and civilization. If you've been enjoying this audiobook, be sure to follow us on Spotify and YouTube for more series, more chapters, and the full continuation of this historical work. Now settle in as we continue Book 1 of the Antiquities of the Jews, beginning with Chapter 8. Chapter 8. That when there was a famine in Canaan, Abram went thence into Egypt, and after he had continued there a while, he returned back again. 1. Now, after this, when a famine had invaded the land of Canaan, and Abram had discovered that the Egyptians were in a flourishing condition, he was disposed to go down to them, both to partake of the plenty they enjoyed, and to become an auditor of their priests, and to know what they said concerning the gods, designing either to follow them if they had better notions than he, or to convert them into a better way, if his own notions proved the truest. Now, seeing he was to take Sarai with him, and was afraid of the madness of the Egyptians' regard to women, lest the king should kill him on occasion of his wife's great beauty, he contrived this device. He pretended to be her brother, and directed her in a dissembling way to pretend the same, for he said it would be for their benefit. Now, as soon as he came into Egypt, it happened to Abram as he supposed it would, for the fame of his wife's beauty was greatly talked of, for which reason Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, would not be satisfied with what was reported of her, but would needs see her himself, and was preparing to enjoy her. But God put a stop to his unjust inclinations by sending upon him a distemper and a sedition against his government. And when he inquired of the priests how he might be freed from these calamities, they told him that this his miserable condition was derived from the wrath of God, upon account of his inclinations to abuse the stranger's wife. He then, out of fear, asked Sarai who she was, and who it was that she brought along with her. And when he had found out the truth, he excused himself to Abram, that supposing the woman to be his sister, and not his wife, he set his affections on her, as desiring an affinity with him by marrying her, but not as incited by lust to abuse her. He also made him a large present in money, and gave him leave to enter into conversation with the most learned among the Egyptians, from which conversation his virtue and his reputation became more conspicuous than they had been before. 2. For whereas the Egyptians were formerly addicted to different customs, and despised one another's sacred and accustomed rites, and were very angry one with another on that account, Abram conferred with each of them, and, confuting the reasonings they made use of, every one for their own practices, demonstrated that such reasonings were vain and void of truth. Whereupon he was admired by them in those conferences as a very wise man, and one of great sagacity, when he discoursed on any subject he undertook, and this not only in understanding it, but in persuading other men also to assent to him. He communicated to them arithmetic, and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abram came into Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning, for that science came from the Chaldeans into Egypt, and from thence to the Greeks also. 3. As soon as Abram was come back into Canaan, he parted the land between him and Lot, upon account of the tumultuous behavior of their shepherds, concerning the pastures wherein they should feed their flocks. However, he gave Lot his option or leave to choose which lands he would take. And he took himself what the other left, which were the lower grounds at the foot of the mountains. And he himself dwelt in Hebron, which is a city 7 years more ancient than Tunis of Egypt. But Lot possessed the land of the plain, and the river Jordan, not far from the city of Sodom, which was then a fine city, but is now destroyed by the will and wrath of God, the cause of which I shall show in its proper place hereafter. Chapter 9. The destruction of the Sodomites by the Assyrian wall. At this time, when the Assyrians had the dominion over Asia, the people of Sodom were in a flourishing condition, both as to riches and the number of their youth. There were 5 kings that managed the affairs of this country: Balas, Barsas, Sennabar, and Sumobor, with the king of Bela, and each king led on his own troops. And the Assyrians made war upon them, and dividing their army into 4 parts, fought against them. Now every part of the army had its own commander. And when the battle was joined, the Assyrians were conquerors, and imposed a tribute on the kings of the Sodomites, who submitted to this slavery 12 years. And so long they continued to pay their tribute. But on the 13th year they rebelled, and then the army of the Assyrians came upon them, under their commanders Amraphel, Arioch, Chedorlaomer, and Tidal. These kings had laid waste all Syria and overthrown the offspring of the giants. And when they were come over against Sodom, they pitched their camp at the vale called the Slime Pits. For at that time there were pits in that place. But now, upon the destruction of the city of Sodom, that vale became the Lake Asphaltites, as it is called. Chapter 10. How Abram fought with the Assyrians, and overcame them, and saved the Sodomite prisoners, and took from the Assyrians the prey they had gotten. 1. When Abram heard of their calamity, he was at once afraid for Lot his kinsman, and pitied the Sodomites, his friends and neighbors. And thinking it proper to afford them assistance, he did not delay it, but marched hastily. And the 5th night fell upon the Assyrians near Dan, for that is the name of the other spring of Jordan. And before they could arm themselves, he slew some as they were in their beds, before they could suspect any harm, and others who were not yet gone to sleep, but were so drunk they could not fight, ran away. Abram pursued after them, till, on the 2nd day, he drove them in a body unto Hobah, a place belonging to Damascus, and thereby demonstrated that victory does not depend on multitude and the number of hands, but that the alacrity and courage of soldiers overcome the most numerous bodies of men, while he got the victory over so great an army with no more than 318 of his servants and 3 of his friends. But all those that fled returned home ingloriously. 2. So Abram, when he had saved the captive Sodomites who had been taken by the Assyrians, and Lot also his kinsman, returned home in peace. Now the king of Sodom met him at a certain place, which they called the King's Dale, where Melchizedek, king of the city Salem, received him. That name signifies the righteous king, and such he was without dispute, insomuch that on this account he was made the priest of God. However, they afterward called Salem Jerusalem. Now this Melchizedek supplied Abram's army in an hospitable manner, and gave them provisions in abundance. And as they were feasting, he began to praise him, and to bless God for subduing his enemies under him. And when Abram gave him the 10th part of his prey, he accepted of the gift. But the king of Sodom desired Abram to take the prey, but entreated that he might have those men restored to him whom Abram had saved from the Assyrians, because they belonged to him. But Abram would not do so, nor would he make any other advantage of that prey than what his servants had eaten, but still insisted that he should afford a part to his friends that had assisted him in the battle. The first of them was called Eshcol, and then Ener, and Mambre. 3. And God commended his virtue, and said, Thou shalt not, however, lose the rewards thou hast deserved to receive by such thy glorious actions. He answered, And what advantage will it be to me to have such rewards, when I have none to enjoy them after me? For he was hitherto childless, and God promised that he should have a son, and that his posterity should be very numerous, insomuch that their number should be like the stars. When he heard that, he offered a sacrifice to God, as he commanded him. The manner of the sacrifice was this: he took an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram in like manner of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a pigeon. And as he was enjoined, he divided the 3 former, but the birds he did not divide. After which, before he built his altar, where the birds of prey flew about, as desirous of blood, a divine voice came to him, declaring that their neighbors would be grievous to his posterity when they should be in Egypt for 400 years, during which time they should be afflicted, but afterward should overcome their enemies, should conquer the Canaanites in war, and possess themselves of their land and of their cities. 4. Now Abram dwelt near the oak called Ogyges. The place belongs to Canaan, not far from the city of Hebron. But being uneasy at his wife's barrenness, he entreated God to grant that he might have male issue. And God required of him to be of good courage, and said that he would add to all the rest of the benefits that he had bestowed upon him ever since he led him out of Mesopotamia, the gift of children. Accordingly, Sarai, at God's command, brought to his bed one of her handmaidens, a woman of Egyptian descent, in order to obtain children by her. And when this handmaid was with child, she triumphed, and ventured to affront Sarai, as if the dominion were to come to a son to be born of her. But when Abram resigned her into the hand of Sarai to punish her, she contrived to fly away, as not able to bear the instances of Sarai's severity to her, and she entreated God to have compassion on her. Now a divine angel met her, as she was going forward in the wilderness, and bid her return to her master and mistress. For if she would submit to that wise advice, she would live better hereafter. For the reason of her being in such a miserable case was this, that she had been ungrateful and arrogant toward her mistress. He also told her that if she disobeyed God and went on still in her way, she should perish. But if she would return back, she should become the mother of a son who should reign over that country. These admonitions she obeyed, and returned to her master and mistress, and obtained forgiveness. A little while afterwards she bare Ismael, which may be interpreted heard of God, because God had heard his mother's prayer. 5. The forementioned son was born to Abram when he was 86 years old. But when he was 99, God appeared to him, and promised him that he should have a son by Sarai, and commanded that his name should be Isaac, and showed him that from this son should spring great nations and kings, and that they should obtain all the land of Canaan by war, from Sidon to Egypt. But he charged him, in order to keep his posterity unmixed with others, that they should be circumcised in the flesh of their foreskin, and that this should be done on the 8th day after they were born. The reason of which circumcision I will explain in another place. And Abram inquiring also concerning Ismael, whether he should live or not, God signified to him that he should live to be very old, and should be the father of great nations. Abram therefore gave thanks to God for these blessings, and then he and all his family, and his son Ismael, were circumcised immediately, the son being that day 13 years of age, and he 99. Chapter 11. How God overthrew the nation of the Sodomites out of his wrath against them for their sins. 1. About this time, the Sodomites grew proud on account of their riches and great wealth. They became unjust towards men and impious towards God, insomuch that they did not call to mind the advantages they received from him. They hated strangers and abused themselves with sodomitical practices. God was therefore much displeased at them, and determined to punish them for their pride, and to overthrow their city, and to lay waste their country, until there should neither plant nor fruit grow out of it. 2. When God had thus resolved concerning the Sodomites, Abraham, as he sat by the oak of Mamre, at the door of his tent, saw 3 angels. And thinking them to be strangers, he rose up and saluted them, and desired they would accept of an entertainment, and abide with him. To which, when they agreed, he ordered cakes of meal to be made presently, and when he had slain a calf, he roasted it, and brought it to them, as they sat under the oak. Now they made a show of eating, and besides, they asked him about his wife Sarah, where she was. And when he said she was within, they said they would come again hereafter, and find her become a mother. Upon which the woman laughed, and said that it was impossible she should bear children, since she was 90 years of age, and her husband was 100. Then they concealed themselves no longer, but declared that they were angels of God, and that one of them was sent to inform them about the child, and 2 of the overthrow of Sodom. 3. When Abraham heard this, he was grieved for the Sodomites, and he rose up and besought God for them, and entreated him that he would not destroy the righteous with the wicked. And when God had replied that there was no good man among the Sodomites, for if there were but 10 such men among them, he would not punish any of them for their sins, Abraham held his peace. And the angels came to the city of the Sodomites, and Lot entreated them to accept of a lodging with him, for he was a very generous and hospitable man, and one that had learned to imitate the goodness of Abraham. Now when the Sodomites saw the young men to be of beautiful countenances, and this to an extraordinary degree, and that they took up their lodgings with Lot, They resolved themselves to enjoy these beautiful boys by force and violence. And when Lot exhorted them to sobriety, and not to offer anything immodest to the strangers, but to have regard to their lodging in his house, and promised that if their inclinations could not be governed, he would expose his daughters to their lust instead of these strangers. Neither thus were they made ashamed. 4. But God was much displeased at their impudent behavior, so that he both smote those men with blindness and condemned the Sodomites to universal destruction. But Lot, upon God's informing him of the future destruction of the Sodomites, went away, taking with him his wife and daughters, who were 2 and still virgins. For those that were betrothed to them were above the thoughts of going, and deemed that Lot's words were trifling. God then cast a thunderbolt upon the city, and set it on fire with its inhabitants, and laid waste the country with the like burning, as I formerly said when I wrote the Jewish war. But Lot's wife, continually turning back to view the city as she went from it, and being too nicely inquisitive what would become of it, although God had forbidden her so to do, was changed into a pillar of salt, for I have seen it, and it remains at this day. Now he and his daughters fled to a certain small place, encompassed with the fire, and settled in it. It is to this day called Zoar, for that is the word which the Hebrews use for a small thing. There it was that he lived a miserable life, on account of his having no company, and his want of provisions. 5. But his daughters, thinking that all mankind were destroyed, approached to their father, though taking care not to be perceived. This they did, that humankind might not utterly fail, and they bare sons. The son of the elder was named Moab, which denotes one derived from his father. The younger bare Ammon, which name denotes one derived from a kinsman, the former of whom was the father of the Moabites, which is even still a great nation. The latter was the father of the Ammonites, and both of them are inhabitants of Celesyria. And such was the departure of Lot from among the Sodomites. Chapter 12, concerning Abimelech, and concerning Ismael the son of Abraham, and concerning the Arabians who were his posterity. 1. Abraham now removed to Gerar of Palestine, leading Sarah along with him, under the notion of his sister, using the like dissimulation that he had used before, and this out of fear, for he was afraid of Abimelech, the king of that country, who did also himself fall in love with Sarah, and was disposed to corrupt her. But he was restrained from satisfying his lust by a dangerous distemper which befell him from God. Now when his physicians despaired of curing him, he fell asleep, and saw a dream warning him not to abuse the stranger's wife. And when he recovered, he told his friends that God had inflicted that disease upon him, by way of punishment for his injury to the stranger, and in order to preserve the chastity of his wife. For that she did not accompany him as his sister, but as his legitimate wife. And that God had promised to be gracious to him for the time to come, if this person be once secure of his wife's chastity. When he had said this, by the advice of his friends, he sent for Abraham, and bid him not to be concerned about his wife, or fear the corruption of her chastity, for that God took care of him, and that it was by his providence that he received his wife again, without her suffering any abuse. And he appealed to God, and to his wife's conscience, and said that he had not any inclination at first to enjoy her, if he had known she was his wife. But since, said he, thou leddest her about as thy sister, I was guilty of no offense. He also entreated him to be at peace with him, and to make God propitious to him, and that if he thought fit to continue with him, he should have what he wanted in abundance. But that if he designed to go away, he should be honorably conducted, and have whatsoever supply he wanted when he came thither. Upon his saying this, Abraham told him that his pretense of kindred to his wife was no lie, because she was his brother's daughter, and that he did not think himself safe in his travels abroad, without this sort of dissimulation, and that he was not the cause of his distemper, but was only solicitous for his own safety. He said also that he was ready to stay with him, whereupon Abimelech assigned him land and money, and they covenanted to live together without guile, and took an oath at a certain well called Beersheba, which may be interpreted the well of the oath, and so it is named by the people of the country unto this day. 2. Now in a little time Abraham had a son by Sarah, as God had foretold to him, whom he named Isaac, which signifies laughter. And indeed they so called him, because Sarah laughed when God said that she should bear a son, she not expecting such a thing, as being past the age of childbearing, for she was 90 years old, and Abraham 100, so that this son was born to them both in the last year of each of those decimal numbers. And they circumcised him upon the 8th day. And from that time the Jews continued the custom of circumcising their sons within that number of days. But as for the Arabians, they circumcised after the 13th year, because Ismael, the founder of their nation, who was born to Abraham of the concubine, was circumcised at that age, concerning whom I will presently give a particular account with great exactness. 3. As for Sarah, she at first loved Ismael, who was born of her own handmaid Hagar, with an affection not inferior to that of her own son, for he was brought up in order to succeed in the government. But when she herself had borne Isaac, she was not willing that Ismael should be brought up with him, as being too old for him, and able to do him injuries when their father should be dead. She therefore persuaded Abraham to send him and his mother to some distant country. Now, at the first, he did not agree to what Sarah was so zealous for, and thought it an instance of the greatest barbarity to send away a young child and a woman unprovided of necessaries. But at length he agreed to it, because God was pleased with what Sarah had determined. So he delivered Ismael to his mother, as not yet able to go by himself, and commanded her to take a bottle of water and a loaf of bread, and so to depart, and to take necessity for her guide. But as soon as her necessary provisions failed, she found herself in an evil case. And when the water was almost spent, she laid the young child, who was ready to expire, under a fig tree, and went on further, that so he might die while she was absent. But a divine angel came to her, and told her of a fountain hard by, and bid her take care, and bring up the child, because she should be very happy by the preservation of Ismael. She then took courage upon the prospect of what was promised her, and, meeting with some shepherds, by their care she got clear of the distresses she had been in. 4. When the lad was grown up, he married a wife, by birth an Egyptian, from whence the mother was herself derived originally. Of this wife were born to Ismael 12 sons, Nebaioth, Kedar, Abdil, Mabzam, Idumas, Masmaos, Masaos, Kodad, Teman, Jetur, Naphisis, Cadmas. These inhabited all the country from Euphrates to the Red Sea, and called it Nabatean. They are an Arabian nation, and named their tribes from these, both because of their own virtue and because of the dignity of Abraham their father. Chapter 13, concerning Isaac, the legitimate son of Abraham. 1. Now Abraham greatly loved Isaac, as being his only begotten, and given to him at the borders of old age, by the favor of God. The child also endeared himself to his parents still more, by the exercise of every virtue, and adhering to his duty to his parents, and being zealous in the worship of God. Abraham also placed his own happiness in this prospect, that, when he should die, he should leave this his son in a safe and secure condition, which accordingly he obtained by the will of God, who, being desirous to make an experiment of Abraham's religious disposition towards himself, appeared to him, and enumerated all the blessings he had bestowed on him, how he had made him superior to his enemies, and that his son Isaac, who was the principal part of his present happiness, was derived from him. And he said that he required this son of his as a sacrifice and holy oblation. Accordingly, he commanded him to carry him to the mountain Moriah, and to build an altar, and offer him for a burnt offering upon it, for that this would best manifest his religious disposition towards him, if he preferred what was pleasing to God before the preservation of his own son. 2. Now Abraham thought that it was not right to disobey God in anything, but that he was obliged to serve him in every circumstance of life, since all creatures that live enjoy their life by his providence, and the kindness he bestows on them. Accordingly, he concealed this command of God, and his own intentions about the slaughter of his son, from his wife, as also from every one of his servants. Otherwise, he should have been hindered from his obedience to God. And he took Isaac, together with 2 of his servants, and laying what things were necessary for a sacrifice upon an ass, he went away to the mountain. Now the 2 servants went along with him 2 days, But on the third day, as soon as he saw the mountain, he left those servants that were with him till then in the plain, and, having his son alone with him, he came to the mountain. It was that mountain upon which King David afterward built the temple. Now they had brought with them everything necessary for a sacrifice, excepting the animal that was to be offered only. Now Isaac was 25 years old, and as he was building the altar, he asked his father what he was about to offer, since there was no animal there for an oblation. To which it was answered, that God would provide himself an oblation, he being able to make a plentiful provision for men out of what they have not, and to deprive others of what they already have, when they put too much trust therein, that therefore, if God pleased to be present and propitious at this sacrifice, he would provide himself an oblation. 3. As soon as the altar was prepared, and Abraham had laid on the wood, and all things were entirely ready, he said to his son, open quote, O son, I poured out a vast number of prayers that I might have thee for my son. When thou wast come into the world, there was nothing that could contribute to thy support for which I was not greatly solicitous, nor anything wherein I thought myself happier than to see thee grown up to man's estate, and that I might leave thee at my death the successor to my dominion. But since it was by God's will that I became thy father, and it is now his will that I relinquish thee, bear this consecration to God with a generous mind. For I resign thee up to God, who has thought fit now to require this testimony of honor to himself, on account of the favors he hath conferred on me, in being to me a supporter and defender. Accordingly thou, my son, wilt now die, not in any common way of going out of the world, but sent to God, the Father of all men, beforehand, by thy own father, in the nature of a sacrifice. I suppose he thinks thee worthy to get clear of this world, neither by disease, nor by war, nor by any other severe way, by which death usually comes upon men, but so that he will receive thy soul with prayers and holy offices of religion, and will place thee near to himself. And thou wilt there be to me a succorer and supporter in my old age, on which account I principally brought thee up, and thou wilt thereby procure me God for my comforter instead of thyself. Close quote. 4. Now Isaac was of such a generous disposition as became the son of such a father, and was pleased with this discourse, and said, open quote, that he was not worthy to be born at first, if he should reject the determination of God and of his father, and should not resign himself up readily to both their pleasures, since it would have been unjust if he had not obeyed, even if his father alone had so resolved. Close quote. So he went immediately to the altar to be sacrificed. And the deed had been done, if God had not opposed it, for he called loudly to Abraham by his name, and forbade him to slay his son, and said, open quote, it was not out of a desire of human blood that he was commanded to slay his son, nor was he willing that he should be taken away from him whom he had made his father, but to try the temper of his mind, whether he would be obedient to such a command. Since therefore he now was satisfied as to that his alacrity, and the surprising readiness he showed in this his piety, he was delighted in having bestowed such blessings upon him, and that he would not be wanting in all sort of concern about him, and in bestowing other children upon him, and that his son should live to a very great age, that he should live a happy life, and bequeath a large principality to his children, who should be good and legitimate. Close quote. He foretold also that his family should increase into many nations, and that those patriarchs should leave behind them an everlasting name, that they should obtain the possession of the land of Canaan, and be envied by all men. When God had said this, he produced to them a ram, which did not appear before, for the sacrifice. So Abraham and Isaac, receiving each other unexpectedly, and having obtained the promises of such great blessings, embraced one another. And when they had sacrificed, they returned to Sarah and lived happily together, God affording them his assistance in all things they desired. As chapter 14 concerning Sarah, Abraham's wife, and how she ended her days. 1. Now Sarah died a little while after, having lived 127 years. They buried her in Hebron, the Canaanites publicly allowing them a burying place, which piece of ground Abraham bought for 400 shekels of Ephron, an inhabitant of Hebron. And both Abraham and his descendants built themselves sepulchres in that place. Chapter 15, how the nation of the troglodytes were derived from Abraham by Keturah. 1. Abraham after this married Keturah, by whom 6 sons were born to him, men of courage and of sagacious minds, Zambran and Jazar and Madan and Madian and Josabak and Saus. Now the sons of Sus were Sabathan and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Letusim and Assur and Luam. The sons of Madian were Ephas and Ophran and Anak and Ebedas and Eldas. Now for all these sons and grandsons, Abraham contrived to settle them in colonies, and they took possession of Troglodytis and the country of Arabia the Happy as far as it reaches to the Red Sea. It is related of this Ophran that he made war against Libya and took it, and that his grandchildren, when they inhabited it, called it, from his name, Africa. 2. And indeed Alexander Polyhistor gives his attestation to what I here say, who speaks thus, open quote, Cleodemus the prophet, who was also called Malchus, who wrote a history of the Jews, in agreement with the history of Moses their legislator, relates that there were many sons born to Abraham by Keturah. Nay, he names 3 of them, Aphor and Surim and Japhran. That from Surim was the land of Assyria denominated, and that from the other 2, Aphor and Japhran, the country of Africa took its name, because these men were auxiliaries to Hercules when he fought against Libya and Antiochus, and that Hercules married Aphor's daughter, and of her he begat a son, Diodorus, and that Sophon was his son, from whom that barbarous people called Sophacians were denominated. Chapter 16, how Isaac took Rebekah to wife. 1. Now when Abraham, the father of Isaac, had resolved to take Rebekah, who was granddaughter to his brother Nahor, for a wife to his son Isaac, who was then about 40 years old, he sent the ancientest of his servants to betroth her, after he had obliged him to give him the strongest assurances of his fidelity, which assurances were given after the manner following. They put each other's hands under each other's thighs. Then they called upon God as the witness of what was to be done. He also sent such presents to those that were there as were in esteem, on account that they either rarely or never were seen in that country. The servant got thither not under a considerable time, for it requires much time to pass through Mesopotamia, in which it is tedious traveling, both in the winter for the depth of the clay, and in summer for want of water, and besides this, for the robberies there committed, which are not to be avoided by travelers, but by caution beforehand. However, the servant came to Haran, and when he was in the suburbs, he met a considerable number of maidens going to the water. He therefore prayed to God that Rebekah might be found among them, or her whom Abraham sent him as his servant to espouse to his son, in case his will were that this marriage should be consummated, and that she might be made known to him by the sign, that while others denied him water to drink, she might give it him. 2. With this intention he went to the well, and desired the maidens to give him some water to drink. But while the others refused, on pretense that they wanted it all at home, and could spare none for him, one only of the company rebuked them for their peevish behavior toward the stranger, and said, What is there that you will ever communicate to anybody, who have not so much as given the man some water? She then offered him water in an obliging manner, and now he began to hope that his grand affair would succeed. But desiring still to know the truth, he commended her for her generosity and good nature, that she did not scruple to afford a sufficiency of water to those that wanted it, though it cost her some pains to draw it, and asked who were her parents, and wished them joy of such a daughter. And mayst thou be espoused, said he, to their satisfaction, into the family of an agreeable husband, and bring him legitimate children. Nor did she disdain to satisfy his inquiries, but told him her family. They, says she, call me Rebekah. My father was Bethuel, but he is dead, and Laban is my brother, and together with my mother takes care of all our family affairs, and is the guardian of my virginity. When the servant heard this, he was very glad at what had happened, and at what was told him, as perceiving that God had thus plainly directed his journey, and producing his bracelets and some other ornaments which it was esteemed decent for virgins to wear, he gave them to the damsel by way of acknowledgment, and as a reward for her kindness in giving him water to drink, saying, it was but just that she should have them, because she was so much more obliging than any of the rest. She desired also that he would come and lodge with them, since the approach of the night gave him not time to proceed farther. And producing his precious ornaments for women, he said he desired to trust them to none more safely than to such as she had shown herself to be, and that he believed he might guess at the humanity of her mother and brother, that they would not be displeased from the virtue he found in her, for he would not be burdensome, but would pay the hire for his entertainment and spend his own money. To which she replied that he guessed right as to the humanity of her parents, but complained that he should think them so parsimonious as to take money, for that he should have all on free cost. But she said she would first inform her brother Laban, and if he gave her leave, she would conduct him in. 3. As soon then as this was over, she introduced the stranger, and for the camels the servants of Laban brought them in, and took care of them, and he was himself brought into supper by Laban. And after supper he says to him and to the mother of the damsel, addressing himself to her, Abraham is the son of Terah, and a kinsman of yours. For Nahor, the grandfather of these children, was the brother of Abraham, by both father and mother. Upon which account he hath sent me to you, being desirous to take this damsel for his son to wife. He is his legitimate son, and is brought up as his only heir. He could indeed have had the most happy of all the women in that country for him, but he would not have his son marry any of them. But, out of regard to his own relations, he desired him to match here, whose affection and inclination I would not have you despise. For it was by the good pleasure of God that other accidents fell out in my journey, and that thereby I lighted upon your daughter and your house. For when I was near to the city, I saw a great many maidens coming to a well, and I prayed that I might meet with this damsel, which has come to pass accordingly. Do you therefore confirm that marriage, whose espousals have been already made by a divine appearance, and show the respect you have for Abraham, who hath sent me with so much solicitude, in giving your consent to the marriage of this damsel. Upon this they understood it to be the will of God, and greatly approved of the offer, and sent their daughter, as was desired. Accordingly Isaac married her, the inheritance being now come to him. For the children by Keturah were gone to their own remote habitations. Chapter 17, concerning the death of Abraham. 1. A little while after this, Abraham died. He was a man of incomparable virtue, and honored by God in a manner agreeable to his piety towards him. The whole time of his life was 175 years, and he was buried in Hebron with his wife Sarah, by their sons Isaac and Ishmael. Chapter 18, concerning the sons of Isaac, Esau and Jacob, of their nativity and education. 1. Now Isaac's wife proved with child after the death of Abraham, and when her belly was greatly burdened, Isaac was very anxious and inquired of God, who answered that Rebekah should bear twins, and that 2 nations should take the names of those sons, and that he who appeared the second should excel the elder. Accordingly she, in a little time, as God had foretold, bare twins, the elder of whom, from his head to his feet, was very rough and hairy, but the younger took hold of his heel as they were in the birth. Now the father loved the elder, who was called Esau, a name agreeable to his roughness, for the Hebrews call such a hairy roughness Esau or Seir, but Jacob, the younger, was best beloved by his mother. 2. When there was a famine in the land, Isaac resolved to go into Egypt, the land there being good, but he went to Gerar as God commanded him. Here Abimelech, the king, received him, because Abraham had formerly lived with him and had been his friend. And as in the beginning he treated him exceedingly kindly, so he was hindered from continuing in the same disposition to the end by envy. For when he saw that God was with Isaac and took such great care of him, he drove him away from him. But Isaac, when he saw how envy had changed the temper of Abimelech, retired to a place called the Valley, not far from Gerar. And as he was digging a well, the shepherds fell upon him and began to fight, in order to hinder the work. And because he did not desire to contend, the shepherds seemed to get the better of him. So he still retired and dug another. And when certain other shepherds of Abimelech began to offer him violence, he left that also, still retiring, thus purchasing security to himself by rational and prudent conduct. At length they gave him leave to dig a well without disturbance. He named this well Rehoboth, which denotes a large space, but of the former wells one was called Escon, which denotes strife, the other Satena, which name signifies enmity. 3. It was now that Isaac's affairs increased and were in a flourishing condition, and this by his great riches. But Abimelech, thinking himself in danger by living near him, and being secretly envious of him, was afraid that his former friendship with Isaac would not secure him, if Isaac should remember the injuries he had formerly offered him. He therefore renewed his friendship with him by Phicol, one of his generals. And when he had obtained everything he desired, by reason of Isaac's good nature, who preferred the earlier friendship Abimelech had shown to himself and his father to his later wrath against him, he returned home in peace. 4. Now when Esau, one of the sons of Isaac, whom the father principally loved, was now come to the age of 40 years, he married Adah, the daughter of Halon, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Esebion, which Halon and Esebion were great lords among the Canaanites, thereby taking upon himself the authority and pretending to have dominion over his own marriages, without so much as asking the advice of his father. For had Isaac been the arbitrator, he had not given him leave to marry thus, for he was not pleased with contracting any alliance with the people of that country. But not caring to be uneasy to his son by commanding him to put away these wives, he resolved to be silent. 5. But when he was old and could not see at all, he called Esau to him and told him that besides his blindness and the disorder of his eyes, his very old age hindered him from his worship of God by sacrifice. He bid him therefore go out a-hunting, and when he had caught as much venison as he could, to prepare him a supper, that after this he might make supplication to God, to be to him a supporter and an assister during the whole time of his life, saying that it was uncertain when he should die, and that he was desirous by prayers for him to procure beforehand God's mercy toward him. 6. Accordingly, Esau went out a-hunting. But Rebekah, thinking it proper to have the supplication made for obtaining the favor of God to Jacob, and that without the consent of Isaac, bid him kill kids of the goats and prepare a supper. So Jacob obeyed his mother according to all her instructions. Now when the supper was got ready, he took a goat's skin and put it about his arm, that by reason of its hairy roughness he might by his father be believed to be Esau, for they being twins, and in all things else alike, differed only in this thing. This was done out of his fear, that before his father had made his supplications, he should be caught in his deceit, and lest he should, on the contrary, provoke his father to curse him. So he brought in the supper to his father. Isaac, perceiving the voice to be Jacob's, but the hands to be rough like Esau's, suspected no deceit, so he ate the supper and betook himself to his prayers and intercessions with God. And he said, open quote, O Lord of all ages and creator of all substance, for it was thou that didst promise to my father great plenty of good things, and hast vouchsafed to bestow on me what I have, and hast promised to my posterity to be their kind supporter, and to bestow on them still greater blessings. Do thou therefore confirm these thy promises, and do not overlook me because of my present weak condition, on account of which I most earnestly pray to thee. Be gracious to this my son, and preserve him and keep him from everything that is evil. Give him a happy life, and the possession of as many good things as thy power is able to bestow. Make him terrible to his enemies, and honorable and beloved among his friends. 7. Thus did Isaac pray to God, thinking his prayers had been made for Esau. He had but just finished them when Esau came in from hunting, and when Isaac perceived his mistake, he was silent. But Esau required that he might be made partaker of the like blessing from his father that his brother had received. But his father refused it, because all his prayers had been spent upon Jacob. So Esau lamented the mistake. However, his father, being grieved at his weeping, said, open quote, Thou shalt excel in hunting and strength of body, in arms and all such sorts of work, and shalt obtain glory forever on those accounts, thou and thy posterity after thee, but still shalt serve thy brother. Close quote. 8. Now the mother delivered Jacob, when she was afraid that his brother would inflict some punishment upon him because of the mistake about the prayers of Isaac. For she persuaded her husband to take a wife for Jacob out of Mesopotamia, of her own kindred, Esau having married already Basemath, the daughter of Ismael, without his father's consent. For Isaac did not like the Canaanites, so that he disapproved of Esau's former marriages, which made him take Basemath to wife, in order to please him, and indeed he had a great affection for her. This concludes Book 1, chapters 8 through 18 of the Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus. Thank you for listening to this ongoing historical audiobook series. Your support and engagement help keep these ancient writings alive for generations to come. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and YouTube for more series, including the continuation of this book and future volumes. And as always, listen up for the next chapter as we continue our journey through the writings of Josephus. End of chapters 8 through 18.